and still today I do consider myself Jewish ethnically, who is religiously Muslim. I was also actually a staunch Zionist. I was super pro-Israel. Assalamu alaikum. So in this video I will be speaking about my revert story. Basically, I was born Jewish to a Jewish family and I converted to Islam in 2018. Born in Montreal, Canada, to actually a Hasidic family. My father is Ashkenazi Jewish and my mother is Mizrahi and Sephardic. That means her mother was born in Morocco and her father was born in Yemen, and my mother was actually born in occupied Palestine, or as Jewish people call it, Israel. So up until I was 3 or 4 years old, up until my parents' divorce, I was raised Hasidic. And afterwards, once my parents got divorced, my mother took me and my siblings out of the Hasidic community, but we still remained Jewish, of course, and we still remained in the Jewish community. So growing up, I always considered myself Israeli Jewish, and still today I do consider myself Jewish ethnically, which people sometimes have difficulty understanding, but I still consider myself as an ethnic Jew who is religiously Muslim. I went to a Jewish school my whole life, obviously up until the end of high school. So at that point, I was super Jewish, believed in God. I always believed in God, but I believed in Judaism specifically. I believed in the Torah. I believed in the teachings of Judaism because I had a Jewish education and I held really closely to that. I was also actually a staunch Zionist. I was super pro-Israel. And yeah, I held really closely to my religion and to, I guess, what I thought was my nationality, being Israeli. Until I graduated high school, once I left, the Jewish community, that I started meeting, non-Jewish people. A woman asked me about Shabbat, and I explained to her, and it started putting a lot of doubt in me. And I remember that question specifically from that woman. I still remember who asked me that. Her name was Mary, and it really like stuck with me. And at that point, soon after, I started realizing that a lot of things that Jewish people were doing didn't make sense to me. And I was like, So I started distancing myself away from Judaism. Doubt in my heart about what I was practicing. And then I basically started distancing myself from God. So I lived like that for a few months. But then at one point, I was like, I feel alienated from God. I feel like I need to become closer to God. I feel like I needed to mend my relationship with God because I was starting to feel, empty without God's presence in my life. So before going to school every day on the bus, I took a little Tehillim, which is a book of Psalms, which was written by the King David. And I started reading that, and it was really nice. It was a nice book. And I remember one thing in particular that I remember that kept reoccurring was how King David mentioned that, he was prostrating in prayer to God. We prostrate in prayer to you, God. And it was mentioned over and over again. And that got me curious. So I was like, why don't Jews prostrate during prayer? So I Googled it. I went to Chabad.org, blah, blah, blah. I did a lot of research. Spoke to rabbis, but it still did not satisfy me. All the responses I was getting were not satisfactory to me. So I was like, this is weird. So as I was doing a lot of research, I was reading Jews prostrate during prayer. The sect of the Karaite Jews came up. So the Karaite Jews are Jews who follow strictly the Torah, and they don't follow the Talmud and other rabbinical texts or interpretations. And it was at that point that I realized that Judaism, standard modern Judaism that people practice today, is called Rabbinic Judaism because it is inspired not inspired, but a lot of the rules and a lot of the holidays and the regulations that Jews practice today are from rabbis, from rabbinical interpretation. And it was at that point that I was like, that's strange. Like, but it also explained my questions, like, why did we do this on Passover? Why did we do this on Hanukkah? Why did we do this on Rosh Hashanah? And it answered a lot of my questions. I was like, it makes sense because they're following the interpretations of rabbis and they're not following, like strictly, they're following the word of the Torah, but these specifications, even like the Shabbat restrictions, don't come specifically, all of them, from Torah. So I was like, you know what? Maybe I should look into Karaite Judaism because it made sense to me. They were following strictly the Torah. At that same time, I didn't really have any Muslim friends. I had one Muslim friend, but she wasn't, we never spoke about religion. But I knew some like Muslim people online that I was like a Muslim online friend that I never met. Actually, I never really met in real life. But anyways, we had a discussion and we were sending each other videos about like, religion. And I saw this one video about like, debates between Muslims and Jews. And I started realizing at that point that Islam and Judaism are so similar. It was also at that point that I realized that Jews and Muslims believe in the same God, and also Christians. So I was like, okay, they believe in the Torah, they believe in the Gospels, they believe in all of the Jewish prophets that, Jews believe in. And the only thing that they believe in more is the Prophet Jesus and the Prophet Muhammad as the seal of the prophets, and the Quran as the word of God. So basically that's the only addition that it has to over Judaism. And I also, while I was Jewish, was like, oh yeah, Muslims stole our texts, they're just reusing, they're like copying our texts. That's really what I believed. And I realized that it wasn't copying Jewish texts, it was literally the same God. So God was continuing his message, it's the same message, and it just has, I guess, some like new information, some new tweaks. And I explained it to myself as like, it's like an update. People don't like when I use that term, but in my head I was like, it's like an update to Judaism. So at that point I was like, okay, it's not a whole different thing. And I decided to actually start looking to Islam. And also when I was thinking about, when I was reading the Tehillim and I realized that, he was saying, we prostrate in prayer to God, I did actually think of Muslims. So I was like, okay, that makes sense why Muslims pray to God the way they do, with like prostration, because that's what God wanted, that's what God says. And that's how Jews were praying up until a certain point, until the rabbis came along and said, we don't pray this way anymore. And I also remember, how like Muslims pray without their shoes on, and I was like, that makes sense because a mosque is a holy ground. When you pray when you speak to God, you're speaking to someone so holy, so you have to respect them and take off your shoes. At a time when Moses spoke to God and in the burning fire, I'm not sure exactly what it's called in English, but it's like the fire, and God said, please take off your shoes to speak to me, to address me. And this was holy ground, so he had to take off his shoes. And I was like, that makes sense. At this point I still was not like actually considering being Muslim, but it was little things like that that kept being added into like, I kept realizing that I was like, okay, Islam makes sense. Until one point I was like, you know what, I'll read the Quran. The Quran made sense. And I was like, like there's nothing wrong with it. It's perfect. But at some point I realized that actually accepting Islam and being Muslim and practicing Islam would actually make me a better Jew. And I wasn't separating myself from Judaism. It was the same God. It was still the same religion as the God of Judaism. And it was just over time, like I said, many little things that I learned about Islam that made sense to me, even the modesty, how Muslims dress, it made sense to me. And I'm like, my whole life, modesty made sense to me. But I do remember when I decided basically to become Muslim, it was Ramadan, it was 2017. And I was like, you know what, I'm going to do Ramadan. So subhanAllah, I actually learned to pray like really quickly. And I remember that, I think it's in the Quran, or it says that, God made this language easy for you to understand. And I was like, subhanallah. I remember one time I was in bed, I was like, okay, how do you become Muslim? And it said, you just need to repeat this word. It was the shahada, the sentence. So I said it on my bed. I was like, you know, la ilaha illallah, Muhammad Rasulullah. And I said it and I'm like, am I Muslim now? Like, I feel the same. So technically I was Muslim since 2017, but I still at that point wasn't like fully like immersed in Islam. Like my heart wasn't fully there to Islam. Like I want to do it, I want to fully do it. So it was in January 26, 2018 that I actually converted to Islam. I took my shahada, and that's when I consider myself fully Muslim.